pass over to you, Henry, first. Yeah, if that's all right. So, and then obviously I've said to Bryn, regarding the questions, raising hands, interaction, and opening up the chat and all that sort of stuff. So, but I'll monitor the lobby and do all that sort of side, and then
you've been on loads of calls, haven't you, Bryn?
I'm always yes, actually.
Yeah. I've started coming when I can.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much for your support. Right, let's submit all, and then we'll start the ball and monitor the lobby.
Are you happy you recorded, Bryn?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Morning, Chris. Morning, Michael. Morning, Ian. Morning, everybody. Morning, Derek. Morning, Podreg. Morning, Paul. Morning, Peter. If you've just joined, if you could very kindly mute, that would be excellent. Morning, JQ. Love to see you. Can you mute JQ? And yeah, Michael, if you can. No, he's not on mine, he isn't. No. I'll mute him. He'll love that. So I'll mute JQ. There you go. Actually, JQ's in twice. I don't quite know why, but there we go. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. It's yep. Okay. Don't quite know why JQ's in twice, but there we go. Yeah. Morning, Chris. Morning, Con. So that's great. So it's now 10:32. So morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's coffee morning. We are delighted that Baron Davies of Brixton is with us this morning in conversation with Henry. We had a very long conversation before we started regarding whether he wants to be Baron or Lord, but I think he just likes Bryn, if that's okay. Should we just say that? So that's fine. So the session's being recorded. Can we have a thumbs up, everybody, that we're being recorded? Cheers, JQ. Cheers, Con. Thanks, Ian. And, if in a usual fashion, if you'd like to ask a question of Bryn or of Henry, please raise a hand. The chat is also open, so if you want to put any comments in the chat, that's fine. But Henry and I will look at the chat and expose you to unmute and ask your questions. So without any further ado, I will pass on to Henry, and Henry will do the introduction. So over to you, Henry. And you're muted, Henry. Of all the people not to mute, there we go. No, you're still muted, Henry.
No, I'm not.
Oh, there you are. I can hear you now. There we go.
Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so having wasted 30 seconds of all your time, no more ado from me. Bryn, my first question to you, and we've got certain of these questions lined up, is about SERPs. You were around in the days of Keith Joseph back in the 70s. You saw the thing in, you saw the thing out. What lessons can we learn from SERPs S2P in our environment today?
And it's just, I'm doing this, I've thought about these issues a lot. I don't have a handout or anything like that. So this is just sort of off the top of my head. I hope they're not ramblings. I'm also conscious that Andy Young is with us, who knows as much and more about all this as I do. Keith, it's interesting to see how we've ended up through a long circle with something which is closer to Keith Joseph than SERPs. SERPs was introduced, Barbara Castle became Secretary of State in '74. And she introduced her Better Pensions White Paper, which led to the Social Security Pensions Act of '78. I started work at the TUC as the pensions officer in '74. So almost one of the first things I did when I joined the staff of the TUC was to go to the a press conference at which Better Pensions was launched. And then I was deeply involved in all the discussions, and at that time the TUC was closely involved in all development of policy across the board, but also in pensions. So I was, although Barbara Castle introduced the white paper, the baton was passed on to David Ennals fairly soon after, and so it's as much or more David Ennals' scheme as it was. So I was deeply involved in all the discussions. And then I was involved in a practical way because I was appointed to the Occupational Pensions Board, which was responsible for taking the white paper and translating it into something that employers could engage with. So they're deeply involved, and I was subsequently, I appointed myself life president of the Preserve SERPs campaign, which was singularly unsuccessful. Although it's worth saying, I was thinking about this last night, and it actually hinged on the alternative history. It would be really interesting if you think the result of the 92 election had gone another way, because Michael Meacher would have been Secretary of State for Social Services, I would have been his SPAD, and we would have restored SERPs. That's what we wanted to do. By 97, we had New Labour and a very different pensions agenda. And this led to the slow, painful death of SERPs. So in that sense, I've seen this entire policy cycle through from introduction to death. And the odd thing is that having a good, successful policy isn't enough. People may think this is paranoid. I think lesson one is you have to the baddies in all this are definitely the pensions industry and people in the Conservative Party who adopted these ideas about funded pensions good, pay-as-you-go state pensions bad, which is far too simplistic. So what lessons? So the first lesson is build a constituency for policy. We sort of lost our way during the 90s, and I probably as much or more to blame as anyone for that. But it was death by 1,000 cuts. We had the Fowler reforms, and then subsequently under a Labour government, we had a move to the state second pension, forgetting what was good. The second thing is the best 20 years rule was probably a mistake. You've got to get the design right. I strongly supported back in the day, best 20 years rule. It was intended to help those who had gaps in their service, but it actually provided more help for people who had periods of low income and high income, who aren't just, well, it was intended to help women, but it helped lots of other people as well and made the scheme extremely expensive. And scary figures were produced that God, I'm forgetting the time scale, but there was the work from Institute of Fiscal Studies, who essentially said it was all too expensive, and that caught imagination. Well, providing people with decent pensions is expensive. There's no way around that, and so the issue isn't really issues whether you want a decent scheme. So you have to confront the issue of expenses. But as I say, the policy itself was a success. The interesting thing is that the switch to the Steve Webb reforms was only possible because of the success of SERPs. The resources were there, are there, to pay everyone this new higher, the new state pension as opposed to the old state pension, because they were able to snaffle part of the SERPs pension and stick it on the basic state pension to produce the new state pension. People, I have this debate with many people in the pensioners movement who think that because the new state pension is higher than the basic state pension, the old basic state pension, that the new scheme is better. But in fact, clearly it isn't, because expenditure was forecast to fall with the new policy. So someone was losing out. And in fact, quite a few people gained from the switch. I accept that, but that just means even more people are losing out because the overall cost of the scheme was low. So what lessons Well, having the right policy isn't enough. You have to build up that consensus about what it delivers. Now, pensions policy now is the outcome of the Pensions Commission, who did brilliant work. I'm a great fan of the work of the Pensions Commission. If you read their analysis, it's absolutely spot on about where pensions were going by the mid-noughties. If you, I persuaded Jeannie Drake that if you read the text very carefully, it didn't necessarily require the additional pension over and above the flat rate pension to be funded. And I think there's ways in which we could move from the present system to having additional state provision within the pension commission structure, but that's sort of winding up the debate. So what lessons? Main lesson, it was a success. We didn't do a good enough job at making sure people understand why it was a success and how it was a success and what it could contribute to future thinking.
Do you think, after saying that, if there is space from what the Pensions Commission was saying for a future unfunded second pension, that we might get one going forward? Because and if so, what are the advantages of an unfunded second pension over a funded one? It's a dumb question, I know, but it's worth us just sort of thinking about that for a second.
Well, I think you need to start from thinking about what pensions you want people to have and how much certainty you want about. And the present structure doesn't offer, in my view, sufficient certainty for people on low pay. People on high pay, that's fine. They can save for their retirement. It's not an issue. But people on low fractured incomes up to middle incomes can't depend. And we definitely can't depend on having a decent pension when they retire. And we try and patch that by talking about, well, people need to be educated and pension funds need to be steered into profitable investments. But to my mind, they're just patching up a structure which will never be able to deliver the sort of certainty we want to give people with their expected pensions. And history tells us that if you design a system for poor people, just for poor people, it turns out to be a poor system. You have to have a universal system that's available to everyone. And then that's the only hope of ensuring people on low incomes get a decent pension, ensuring that they get a decent pension. At the moment, we're heading for people to get worse pensions, as the good pensions that came out of SERPs, combining people that contracted out pensions that people got from their occupational schemes and even their personal pensions, if you lump all those in as what's the good that SERPs did, that is currently phasing out of the system. As people retire in future, they'll have had less and less benefit during their lifetime from the accelerated accrual of SERPs. Accelerated accrual is another advantage of a unfunded system. If you want, people now talking about, well, 8% is enough, should be 12%. Well, okay, you make it 12%, but that's still going to be 40, 50 years before you can deliver, before that system delivers decent, the full rate of pensions. And that's too long to wait. The great thing about SERPs, it was introduced in 78 and was delivering full benefits in 98. A funded scheme will never do that. And it also offers the certainty, can offer the certainty, provided, this is the big qualification, that it has the political clout. You compare the situation in the States, where they keep on trying, the right, in inverted commas, whoever they are, keep on assaulting social security system, and it's not as good as it could be, but it has tremendous political clout, the third rail of American politics that SERPs unfortunately never did.
You talk about a universal second pension, unfunded second pension. Is this something that you would expect the wealthy to opt out of, as they did with regards personal pensions and SERPs, or is this something that you'd see some kind of means testing on, so it was targeting at the people with the poor, or is it really something that you could see everybody getting?
The first. I'm totally against means testing. Just take that as read. I think the political it will never work politically if people don't have the ability to opt out. This was the basic truth that was pointed out with national superannuation, Labour Party document in the 1950s. Given where we are, if I was designing an ideal pension system from scratch, maybe we wouldn't have scary words contracting out. But
I mean, I
think that's inevitable. So the first of what you said, rich people.
There's a natural break point in the system at the moment, isn't it? The self-employed, those people earning under £10,000, quite a few people who are sort of in the gig economy who we don't really know whether they're workers or not. All those people are outside of workplace pensions and don't get an employer contribution. So presumably those are people you would target with a state second pension initially, and you would expect those who get an employer contribution to be the ones who opted out. Is that what I'm hearing in your thinking?
Well, no. I think that'd be right. I think that there should be a state option for people with their automatic enrolment contributions.
All right.
And that would be so attractive because it would be offered on the same. I'm frightened of extending the conversation too wide, but everyone complains about these gold-plated public service pension schemes. My answer to that is offer everyone as good terms as the public service pension schemes get, and they could opt to have their automatic enrolment contributions fed into a scheme on a comparable basis. The contributions are much lower than those to public service schemes, but the terms in which they are received would be the same, and they would accrue under those terms, and the government would give a promise, a gilt-edged promise, that, and in fact, those terms, because of the certainty of a government promise, no one ever doubts the government is not going to pay out on its gilt-edged bonds. It's always paid out to individuals on their gilt-edged bonds. It's only defaulted on the government, to the US government. It deferred payment and money owed the US government. But individuals, gilt bonds have always been paid. So I would want a gilt-edged pension promise from the state that people could opt for. And for people, that would be an attractive option for everybody, but particularly for people who on low incomes and transitory employment and so on.
You could see Martin Lewis selling this state option very heavily, and a lot of consumer champs doing so the same, and saying to those people who benefit most from it, okay, this one here is really aimed at you, and then the bigger, wider constituency, you can go your own way. Yeah. But everyone would have access to the state second pension as an alternative to a workplace pension as we understand it today. Yeah.
Well, it would be the workplace pension. People would have the choice. The default choice wouldn't be Nest anymore. It would be this government option. So Nest and the others would still exist, and I'm sure for some people they would prefer to put their money there.
But that would be the opt-out rather than the opt-in.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We kind of moved very quickly onto my second question, which was, what's wrong with the workplace pension system we have at the moment? I mean, everyone talks about it being an undeniable success, etc., in policy terms. But when I talk to ordinary people in group meetings, they moan like Billy-O about the fact that in 2022 they lost 25% of their money if they were in the sort of later stages of life and in bonds and all that. So, I mean, obviously there's a difference in thinking between policymakers and policy holders, if I could say it that way. Do you want to sort of give us your view on the success or otherwise of auto enrolment?
Oh, yes, I do. But I just want to add something to the previous debate. We're already running behind schedule, but
we're not. No.
It's a solution. That my scheme, or the sort of scheme along these lines, is a solution to the carers problem and the gender pensions gap. The reason why women get worse pensions is partly to do with their lower pay, but that issue is general issue is being addressed. But it's also because they have caring responsibilities and gaps in their employment record. And it's only with a pay-as-you-go scheme that we could contemplate the sort of level of credits that they require in order to remove the pensions gap. And so there's another separate argument for an unfunded state scheme. The current regime, great success in terms of increasing coverage, as long as you ignore SERPs, because of course pre-automatic enrolment, everyone had a SERPs pension. So everyone, whether you were in a scheme or not in a scheme, you had an additional pension.
Not the stuff.
So, claiming that it's a great success that only 20% of people are no longer getting an additional pension is a different way of looking at it. But in terms of the policy, and given where we were, it's a great success. It's just that insufficient thought was put into, well, obviously contributions need to be higher. I think is there anyone who thinks maybe the debate about how we get from where we are now to those higher contributions, that's a debate. But everyone agrees that contributions need to be higher in order to deliver a decent pension when people get to retirement. And at the other end, that's the money going in. At the other end, not enough thought was given about what we now call decumulation. There was no thought at all about how these pots, I still lurch a little bit when I use the word, but and I've actually seen on pots, I've seen some research suggests that people don't really like the term pots. I certainly don't. But given the term, the question is, how do people decumulate, jargon again, their pots? And that's still a mess. And I think you've written a lot about this. I'm old-fashioned enough to still believe in annuities. I bought an annuity earlier this year because the terms look good. So, but clearly there's other games in town, and the collective CDC approach to decumulation, I think that's where the future of CDC lies, to be honest.
Okay. I'm going to break now because we've sort of got halfway into it, and I mean I'm conscious of the fact that we've just done our talking and questions and so on. Has anyone got something that they'd like to say at this point? Hands up.
This is Chris's point.
There's a question from Chris. Yeah.
Chris, Chris. Hello, Chris. Yeah.
Yes. Morning, Henry. Morning, Bryn. Henry, you'll be familiar with this, and I think one or two others on the call maybe, because I introduced the subject about 2 or 3 copy mornings ago, the question of risk, what the investment community defines risk as, is essentially the likely short-term movement in asset values. Doesn't tell you fundamentally if over a period of time an asset has been relatively stable but has suddenly reached a position, or not even suddenly, has reached a position whereby it's fundamentally overvalued. And that's been the case for the UK gilt market going back, many years. And now whether the pensions industry just chose to ignore that or just got suckered in by basically the government, and everybody else promoting long-term government stock at ridiculously low rates. And the reason I say they were ridiculously low is if you look at it's an interesting debate about gilt edge.
Get to the point, Chris. Get to the point.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about the gilt edge, because the gilt edge concept, the overseas investor has not been investing in government bonds for a decade or more. And why? Because we lost our AAA rating a decade ago, and therefore there are other alternatives for overseas investors. The only investors were the Bank of England and private sector DB pension funds.
What's your question, Chris?
So the question is, the DC industry really shouldn't have been lifestyling in the way it has for the last umpteen years.
Well, gosh, that's a big topic. I think I've always been unconvinced by lifestyling. It depends on knowing when you want to take your pension. And as someone pointed out, it's much better to do the lifestyling when you put the money in, and then risk on later on in your life, because conceptually that's identical. Lifestyle is actually trying to avoid the potential loss on the run up to retirement, but you could make the loss at the beginning or at the end. It doesn't make any difference. So there's the whole thing about lifestyling, but that's fine for people who have the resources and the interest. And I've met people who've done really well out of close analysis of their investments and what they need to achieve the income they want in retirement, because it's of the nature. I don't meet what I believe to be the much bigger number of people who just want a pension to appear when they get to retirement, and otherwise they don't want to think about it. And that's only something the government can deliver. Again, coming back to this thing about guarantee. About a guaranteed income. I do have views on the approach to risk that has pervaded the pensions industry for the last 25 years, driven by, although it applied specifically to defined benefit schemes, it pervaded the whole of pensions provision, and people thought that the big risk was the value of your fund going up and down, whereas I think the big risk is failing to meet your target. And you can reduce the variability of the outcome only by accepting that on average the end result will be lower. And you have to balance, in a funded scheme, it's inherent, you have to balance those risks, and the risk was interpreted almost entirely as variability, whereas the real risk is it fails to deliver what you want, and that didn't get the attention that it should have done. And I've seen good research that suggests, Con's done a lot of work on this, but also from other people, that by focusing on reducing variability, we've ended up with much worse outcomes over the longer term than we would have done if we'd focused on the overall level of return. In fact, a more variable return where only the bottom part of the distribution is below a high return investment approach, which is variable, but where the bottom of the bell curve of what you expect is only the bottom part of it. I really need a diagram, but you can do better by accepting more variability, is the simple way of putting it.
I see extreme agitation coming in on various people there. Does anyone else want to speak? I know Chris is good. Does anybody else want to speak at this point? Okay, Chris, very quickly.
Just very quickly, just because I wasn't bringing up the DB point, but very quickly, I agree with Bryn. Essentially, the DB industry, essentially it's the discount process that's been the problem. That any open DB scheme, it should be about cash flow matching, and it should be the most important element of total return is the income, and it's matching the income.
Yeah. Yes, but I have to be careful if I say anything about actuarial. Well, anything I say must not be construed as actuarial advice, because I'm no longer doing my CPD. So this is a non-actuarial opinion that actuaries have got it wrong by focusing, for historical reasons, because when you did valuations, as I used to as a student, on bits of paper, you had to end up with a balance sheet. But the balance sheet is not really appropriate for undertaking, plotting the future course of a defined benefit pension scheme. It's meaningless. But as I say, this is not actuarial advice.
Okay, I'm going to move the conversation on now. We could have a very long conversation. Con's put some excellent points up on the chat as well, by the way. But one of the things that I didn't realize you were involved in until I got a text from Al Rush saying, who is this Corbynist peer who's suddenly come on our side with regard to BSPS? But they were talking about you, Bryn.
Yes, they were.
How did you get involved in the whole pension mis-selling thing, and what are you doing about it? This is totally.
Well, I'm there as a resource for Al. Essentially, he's done a fantastic job. I'm not really adding anything to the work that he's done. I just have a platform, and if he has a meeting, and I can help by attending the meeting alongside him, but I have to say I'm not really. I do have a history with the steelworkers. I was the actuarial consultant for many years to the Steel Unions Committee, which used to negotiate with British Steel. For many years I did that. My connection ended about a year before the disaster. I don't. There's some aspects of that I don't quite understand, to be honest. But I wasn't involved directly, and in what happened when the whole deal that was done for the future of the scheme. Some went here, somewhere there. Members were posed with impossible questions, which. This is one of my objections, placing people without any expertise with a one-off question that will affect their future income is bad enough if everyone's playing a straight game. Mix that in with people who are venal, it is a total recipe for disaster. But it's just the whole regulatory structure for financial services needs a thorough going over, because it's this mix between the regulators effectively having a dual job to promote the industry and at the same time to protect individuals. it's just nonsense that this job is given to the same set of bodies, principally the Financial Conduct Authority, and I think it needs a thorough review about how the issue of protecting consumers. Going back to when I was working for the Legal and General many years ago, there was this mantra that people didn't buy life insurance, they were sold it. And that became a way of people came to believe they were doing people a favour. And this, I think, perverted the whole approach of the industry. You saw it as well, Henry. I don't know if you agree with my characterisation, but this idea that we were doing people a favour by selling them policies.
Yeah, I've met an awful lot of advisors who certainly didn't think they were doing anything wrong and zealously believed that they could do better than a DB scheme because of, perhaps misguidedly, certainly, heroically, they believed that wealth was better in the hands of individuals than in the hands of collective organisations distributing it via a sort of DB pension scheme. That was philosophically where a lot of advisors got to. And to your point about Legal in General, they felt that people needed to be sold that idea, and they went out and sold it. And a lot of the advisors feel very aggrieved because they were wound up and told to go off and do something, and then now they're being told your livelihood is at risk because you did it. We can't underestimate your point, which is that we've moved to a regulatory problem here. The lack of activity from the FCA, TPR and others in creating some kind of confidence in the system is appalling. And we now have situations where we have loads of steel workers who have got no pension redress whatsoever. I actually started seeing, and you've probably seen these as well, letters arriving from IFA saying, we were at fault, your redress is £0. That's simply because the redress calculator works on gilt yields. And with gilt yields as where they are right now, there is no redress. How crazy is that? How strange and bizarre to the man in the street is it that they were at fault, but the redress is zero?
Yeah. I do think there's something systemic in financial services that doesn't always lead to good results. I've mentioned, I think I got a little bit of pushback from you, Henry. I dragged up the personal pension mis-selling scandal, and that really wasn't bad actors. It cost billions, but it wasn't bad actors. It was systemic. It was the way in which the industry worked at the time.
I'm going to hand the meeting over now to people who are asking questions. I know we were going to talk a little bit about you in the law, so we might come back to that. But I wanted just to come to the questions, and I'll come to you. I know you've got your hand up, Ian. But first of all, John, your comments about, your free-handed question. Do you want to articulate that to Bryn?
I'm a bit bugged up, so if I may sound a bit like Bonnie Tyler.
Don't look like Bonnie Tyler, mate.
I don't look like Bonnie Tyler, no. I don't dance like Bonnie Tyler, right? But Bryn, yeah,
dresses like Bonnie Tyler, but there you go.
Indeed. But clearly, we've got quite a move towards DB schemes pushing towards buyout, so-called gold standards, and I wonder what you think the Labour leadership's view is, and what the union's view is of both that, and also the Mansion House speech and the autumn statement, and whether that will hold back the tide or not in terms of the DB schemes moving towards and productive capital in a wider sense.
This comes with a sort of health warning for various reasons. First of all, you need to understand the Lords and the Commons, although they might be in the same building, are run at different worlds. The carpets are different colours, and this signifies a different way of working. So that there's that barrier, and we're down our end and we do our work, but real politics goes on at the other end, and the amount of interaction is pretty limited. And there's also an aspect that Henry mentioned, is that it is worthy of a lot of discussion, but the quick and easy version is that I am perceived as a Corbynista, and that erects an additional barrier. So in terms of, I like to think my expertise is used and recognised in the house in which I operate. Within the Labour Party, not so much. And so I really can't answer these questions. And we're also a third point is we're in the, it's a much used caricature or analogy really now, which is the Ming vase phase, where the Labour Party is right wrongly scared about saying anything about anything in case it might scare the horses. The Ming vases, they're walking across a highly polished floor carrying a Ming vase in stocking feet, and so every step is very carefully considered, and no step is taken unless it takes the Ming vase that further forward, and if it doesn't, they won't take the step. The Mansion House speech, I think either they're going to enforce it, and I see that Hammond was actually saying pension schemes would need to be forced to follow the Mansion House reforms. I think as far as Hunt and so have said so far, it's about encouraging pension schemes. Now, I'm all in favour of pension schemes investing more in productive assets. I've been saying this for many years and pointing the finger at legislation and the pensions regulator as standing in the way of this. And so in that sense, I'm perfectly happy. But as soon as the government starts forcing, and so considering those things which government does, which mitigates against better investment for pension funds, is a good thing. As soon as they start about forcing pension schemes to do this sort of thing, well, you might as well have a pay-as-you-go scheme. That, you know, I would leap that far. If the government starts telling you how to invest, it's providing a guarantee. And if it's providing a guarantee, it's now identical to a pay-as-you-go scheme. And you could just forget all the investment. Investing productively in economy is a crucially important thing. I think pension funds don't really have much to do with that. That's about the other side of the arrangements. I don't know how popular this view is, but I think the supply of savings is the problem. It's that industry does a piss poor job of using what savings are available, hence the poor productivity growth that we've had, and hence poor wages. But that's an enormous topic, and which I'm sure people have got lots of some.
I've got a very simple follow-up. Is the carpet in the House of Commons blue and that in the House of Lords red then?
No, it's green in the Commons. Green, it's the same colour as the benches. When you think of the House of Commons, the benches are green. In the House of Lords, the benches are red, and that's reflected in the colours of the carpet. There's a little bit of the House which is sort of carried turquoise, and that's the remaining part of the Royal Palace. It's a little bit which is still a Royal Palace.
Okay, thank you.
I have different coloured carpet.
Are you negotiating a tour, JQ? Are you a House of Commons tour?
You always negotiate, Steve. But thank you.
I'm going to come to Ian in a second. David, are there any specific questions you want to ask following what JQ has just asked?
No, well, no, I think Bryn has covered it in saying he's not kind of plugged in enough to the leadership. I'm sure he wouldn't be indiscreet if he was. But I mean, I think there's some interesting questions about what a Labour government might do. I mean, one is on pensions taxation, where Rachel Reeves, when she first came into Parliament, and then later when she chaired the Treasury Select Committee, was quite opposed to marginal rate tax relief on pension contributions. More recently, in the Ming Vase phase that's been described, she's been assuring the FT that they have no plans to change it. Obviously, not having plans doesn't mean that you won't. It's a kind of slightly classic non-denial denial. I think, so something that's quite topical is whether a Labour government's attitude to the Pot for Life proposals would be a bit different, because there's a strand within the Conservative Party of favouring consumer choice, and you see that might be more attractive to Conservative MPs on average than to Labour MPs on average. There's a whole question of state pension age, where Labour at the last election had a manifesto saying that state pension age would be frozen at 66. I mean, it seems to me very unlikely that they would go with a scorecard cost of reversing the rise to 67, but then I guess it's possible they'd want to kind of make that pitch to that group of people who would otherwise see a loss of state pension income in 2027, 2028. I think some of the Mansion House stuff is quite interesting, that Labour haven't taken, that they might have politically gone for a view of the evidence around private equity and so on boosting returns. Is something they could pick holes in, and maybe is this a Conservative trying to get fees from their private equity friends rather than doing the best for the pension savers, and they haven't done that. I mean, Reeves seems to have been influenced by the Corporation of London proposals for their kind of fund for more assets into this stuff, and their kind of briefing ahead of the autumn statement was, yes, we're on board with all of this stuff. The government needs to go a bit further. So I think there's some interesting things about both what Labour have said and what they haven't said, but might be thinking. But I don't know whether Bryn's in any position to comment further on.
Can you possibly comment, Bryn?
My views have not been sought by the Treasury team. I think the formal position is still that the lifetime allowance will be reinstated, but no figure has been mentioned. But whether that, because it's going to be removed by legislation, reapplying it would presumably require further legislation, and I don't think that would be a priority. So I don't think we're going to have a lifetime allowance anytime soon.
But I think, sorry to interrupt, I think quite interestingly on that, when the announcement was made in the budget, Labour tried to make it quite a big dividing line, and you could have done something much narrower for the health service. Here are all of the bankers and so on who are going to benefit. When it came to the autumn statement debate and the debate on the autumn statement resolution, which authorised the government to go ahead with fully removing the LTA from the tax system, there wasn't a word about it from the Labour front benches. Yeah. So perhaps because they realise reinstating it's going to be a lot more complicated than they might have thought, it seems to have gone from a big dividing line issue to a bit of a problem. We're not sure how we're going to deal with this.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. There's going to be a big agenda. And the incoming Labour government will be faced with astounding problems. So they'll be looking for quick inexpensive wins, I suppose. There's that argument. But getting stuck into pensions legislation will be a nightmare. And it's not as if there's somebody, again, all the power is with the front bench in the Commons. Actually can't remember who does pensions anymore. It was an MP I'd never come across before. And who does pensions within the Treasury team? I don't know. I mean, just as a matter of public knowledge, I don't know. So it's not someone who's out to make a name for themselves.
You know the answer to that, I'm sure. I can't remember either.
Well, the shadow pensions minister we did with PCM is Jill Furness. I'm not sure.
All right.
I'm not sure who's got responsibility over the shadow.
Do you know, Andy? You just come on. I see you taking yourself.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a flippant comment on that. Thank you very much, by the way, Bryn. I thought that was really interesting, and I've got I did one comment on the chat, and I've got many other comments. But in relation to this, Labour, with any luck, might have a few more MPs, and some of them might just happen to know something about pensions. So I don't think we should be worried too much that there won't be somebody who will take it forward.
I got Bryn.
An optimistic note.
I like to be optimistic. Can I just say one of my comments? I was going to give my 20 lessons from SERPs, but I think that's a bit too tedious. But I will say that I disagree that it's 100% agreed that auto-enrollment contributions should be increased across the board for everyone. I know that's the general feeling.
No, Bryn didn't say that.
No, I didn't say that. They definitely should be higher. I'm actually against removing the lower limit. I think it's a big policy mistake, which in fact will make pensions even more unequal, because a lot of people on low incomes will just say no. And once people get in the habit of saying no, it will spread. I think it was a good balance of sorry, the words escaped me. Compromise, a good compromise to have a lower limit. Because if you look at, again, let's go back to the Pension Commission report, it set, well, I think you could debate them, but it set reasonable target pensions. And to achieve a reasonable target pension based on people's pre-retirement income. I've never met anyone who didn't think pensions shouldn't be based on people's previous income. Lots of argument about whether the state should do that, but everyone expects their pension to have some sort of relationship so they can maintain their standard of living into retirement. If people's pay are too low at work, that's the issue to address, is low pay at work. Sorry, I'm sort of shooting off at a tangent.
No, I'm going to time. Because poor old Ian Beeston had his hand up. 20 minutes.
There we go.
There you go. Off you go, Ian.
A very quick question, Bryn, and it relates to your comments about the Financial Conduct Authority. And I think it's impressive we're 54 minutes into a call and nobody's mentioned Consumer Duty, I don't think. But I'd be interested in what you think about Consumer Duty, because for me, it feels like quite a sea change from a regulatory point of view, but I'd love to hear what you think about it.
Oh, absolutely crucial. It was one of the issues I spoke about when the Act to the Financial Services, whatever it was called, Act was going through in the last session. We had a lot of debate and discussion about Consumer Duty, and I would have wanted something that was clearer and more specific on the financial services industry. But placing duties, it's just a gesture unless you've got the enforcement system that makes sure people actually deliver. And again, we come back to this confusion between an issue. Andy Haldane, no less, has, although you don't hear him talk about it much, has talked about the over-financialisation of the UK economy, that it's similar to an oil-rich, the curse of resources. I think the financial services industry is like having too much oil. It destroys the economy from within.
Wow.
That's a challenging remark, as we should.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Escape there.
I mean, that if there was going to be a top 20 quotes of the year,
Right
I think
up there.
that would be in it.
Maybe top 3.
Yeah. It's a shame you weren't on the FCA webinar. Was it earlier this week when they were giving an update on Consumer Duty? But yeah, I mean, they were talking about enforcement quite a bit on that, but we'll wait to see, won't we? But thank you very much for that.
I've had
appreciate
other
that.
suggestions that they're sort of beginning to focus a bit more on their wider responsibilities.
I think one of the challenges is that a lot of people find it quite vague. So that's, but I think inevitably it's very difficult drafting in this area. There's some very nice principles, I think, but yeah, the actual practicality and implementation is challenging, I think. But thank you.
Okay. Throw the floor open to everybody else, because there's quite a lot of people on the call who haven't spoken. Does anyone, want to ask questions of Bryn or make a statement at this stage? We've got a couple of minutes left.
As people are thinking, I'm open to receiving representations from anyone, and if I don't always reply when I get. I read everything, but I don't always reply if people send me stuff that they think might be of interest. And so never hesitate. My email address is public knowledge. It's on the House of Lords website. Send me stuff. I hope what I've said today makes it clear where I'm coming from. But anything that serves the interest of scheme members, that's what I've spent my professional life working on behalf of. So with a focus on enabling, dreadful phrase, ordinary people who are not part of the financial services industry, aren't interested in becoming pensions experts, anything that helps them end up with better incomes in retirement, that's really the core of what I'm interested in.
I'm certainly going to be sending you something following this meeting. And I think that Andy Young probably will do as well, if he's got a few.
Yes, well, Andy and I are in correspondence. So.
You're a sort of behind the scenes pensions commission, aren't you, you two? You're our sort of fringe pensions commission, along with Mr. Keating and others on this call. Look, we're coming to the end now, and I'd just like to say how refreshing it's been to have a call of this quality without, rancor or anyone sort of trying to plough their own furrow. Thank you very much to everyone who's been on the call. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have. And can we say thank you to Bryn for what has really been a most pleasurable hour, and one which I hope will inform the rest of our days going forward. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity to express views. Of course, I do have this wonderful platform now where I can, and I think I am. Well, everyone knows anything about pensions. Unfortunately, I've got a problem this afternoon, but we have the National Insurance Contributions Bill this afternoon. But there's just so much pensions stuff coming through that I am fully occupied.
Well, that's great. And thanks again. Back to you, Steve, if you want to take yourself off mute. Brilliant.
Yeah. Thanks, Bryn. Absolutely fantastic. Very, very enjoyable, and really appreciate that. If anybody hasn't got Bryn's email, then look it up or contact me or Henry. We've got Bryn's email address if you want to submit any ideas, and that's a great offer, Bryn, so thank you very much, Steve, for that. So that's cool. The video will be up this afternoon on Pension Playpen's website, and as usual in these situations, we pray for peace in the East and we pray for peace in the Middle East. Let's hope we can get some movement on both of those fronts. And next week we have the future of advice. So, Bryn, you might like this one. FCA regulated advisors and the future of advice where to invest, what's happening with DB transfers, how are they using automation and tech, and is there trust in that community? So lots and lots of stuff. Simon Crystal from WPS who's the CEO of WPS, will be speaking on the advisory community and where that's going forward. So hope you can join us on that one. But without any further ado, I wish everybody a fantastic day. Enjoy the House of Commons, Bryn, this afternoon on NI, and that sounds a fun-packed afternoon. House of Lords, even, sorry. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. And can we have a tour of the House of Commons and the House of Lords?
Well, the houses, yes,
yeah. Any house would be great.
Okay.
So
we'll set something up.
The royal
sounds
bit.
brilliant.
Royal
The
bit.
royal, yeah, the royal bit. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
But enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks everyone for your time. Fantastic session. Cheers, Bryn. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
All right, bye.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
All right.